It was a quiet Wednesday morning when the news broke a message so simple, yet so heavy, it felt like the entire Latin music world stopped breathing for a moment. Eddie Palmieri, the legendary pianist whose explosive rhythms reshaped modern salsa and Latin jazz, had passed away at the age of 88. The announcement came from Fania Records, the iconic label that once carried his most important works. Their statement was brief, respectful, and devastating. Today, Fania Records mourns the loss of the legendary Eddie Palmieri, one of the most innovative and unique artists in music history. For decades, Palmieri wasn't just a musician, he was a force of nature. His hands, famous for striking the piano with unmatched power and precision, had produced rhythms that became the heartbeat of an entire generation. His music moved bodies, lifted spirits, inspired communities, and shaped the very identity of the Puerto Rican diaspora in New York City. A titan of rhythm, a scholar of Afro-Caribbean traditions, a storyteller of working-class struggles, and a master who blended the emotional fire of salsa with the sophistication of jazz, Eddie Palmieri embodied all of that, and more. As fans began sharing clips, a laugh here, a growl at the piano there, the legendary montuno patterns that defined his style, a wave of collective memory washed across social media. Artists, young and old, spoke of him not just as a musician, but as a teacher, a cultural pillar, someone whose work helped define what Latin music could be. In clubs from New York to San Juan, the news traveled quickly. Tributes began forming spontaneously. A moment of silence here, a short piano phrase there. Music has always been how people responded to Eddie Palmieri, even in grief. But behind the tributes and the headlines lies a story that deserves to be told carefully and clearly. The story of a man who rose from the vibrant streets of Spanish Harlem, challenged expectations, redefined genres, and carried the history of an entire culture through his art. And as we revisit his final days, we're not looking for dramatization or embellishment, simply the truth about how one of the most important figures in Latin jazz spent his last chapter and why his passing has left such a profound silence in the music world. This is the final rhythm of Eddie Palmieri, a farewell worthy of the legend he became. Eddie Palmieri was born in 1936 into a Puerto Rican family living in New York's Spanish Harlem, a neighborhood filled with music, dance, and cultural resilience. His childhood home was bursting with sound, gatherings where relatives played songs from the island, rhythms on the table, and melodies from the streets below. Eddie was surrounded by music long before he understood what it meant to be a musician professionally. His first instruments were not the piano. As a child, he gravitated toward the drums and timbales, absorbing the Afro-Caribbean rhythmic structures that would one day define his sound. But there was another major influence in the house, his older brother, Charlie Palmieri, who would become an acclaimed Latin jazz pianist himself. Charlie's rehearsals, practice sessions, and performances left a deep imprint on the young Eddie, inspiring him to move from percussion to the keyboard. By his teenage years, Palmieri already had a growing reputation in the local Latin dance circuit. He performed in neighborhood ensembles, weddings, and clubs, places where the energy was raw and the audiences demanded authenticity. This early exposure trained him not only musically but culturally. He understood the pulse of the Puerto Rican community in New York because he lived it every day. These formative experiences laid the foundation for the genius he would become. Every rhythm he later composed carried echoes of his upbringing. The street corner percussion, the cafe conversations, the family gatherings filled with music and laughter. Spanish Harlem didn't just raise Eddie Palmieri. It shaped him into an artist whose work would speak for millions. By the mid-60s and early 70s, Eddie Palmieri had become one of the most respected bandleaders in Latin music. His collaborations were legendary, from the magnetic vocals of Ismael Quintana, the voice of La Perfecta, to his later partnership with vibraphonist Cal Tjader. These collaborations were not random. Palmieri had an extraordinary instinct for recognizing artists who could elevate his work. His boldest leap came in 1974 with the release of The Son of Latin Music. This album didn't just win acclaim, it made history as the first Latin album to win a Grammy Award. It was a monumental achievement that validated all the risks he had taken. The unusual arrangements, the daring harmonies, the relentless experimentation. Soon after, his collaboration with a young Lalo Rodriguez, still a teenager at the time, stunned the industry. Rodriguez's voice blended seamlessly with Palmieri's adventurous arrangements, and together they created a sound that felt prophetic, a glimpse into the future of salsa romantica, salsa dura, and Latin jazz fusion. Palmieri's influence spread across countries and genres. Jazz musicians admired his harmonic complexity. Salsa fans idolized his intensity. Young artists studied his arrangements. And for the Puerto Rican community, he became more than a musician. He became a cultural ambassador whose music carried the stories of migration, resilience, and celebration. The Grammy Award was not a peak, but a new beginning. From that moment on, Eddie Palmieri's name entered the global conversation as one of the most innovative Latin musicians of his era. Beyond entertainment, Eddie Palmieri saw music as a form of expression with social weight. In 1971, he released Harlem River Drive, an album that addressed issues of inequality, poverty, and racial injustice. While many artists avoided such themes, Palmieri embraced them respectfully and thoughtfully, using his platform to highlight the struggles of urban communities. In 1973, he released Puerto Rico, an anthem that resonated deeply with listeners both on the island and in the diaspora. It wasn't a political manifesto, it was a heartfelt musical tribute to the place that shaped him, filled with pride and nostalgia. Palmieri's understanding of Afro-Caribbean musical heritage was profound. He often spoke about the history behind the rhythms he used, tracing their origins to the forced migration of African people to the Caribbean centuries earlier. His interviews demonstrated not just technical mastery but cultural insight. To him, music was a living archive, a voice for people whose stories deserved to be told. This commitment to community and cultural history elevated Palmieri's legacy far beyond the stage. He wasn't only performing rhythms, he was preserving them. As the years passed, Eddie Palmieri continued to refine his sound with maturity and depth. His body of work grew to include over half a dozen Grammy wins, numerous acclaimed albums, and compositions studied in music programs worldwide. His signature track, Azúcar Pa' Ti, was added to the United States Library of Congress's National Recording Registry in 2009, an honor reserved for works of significant cultural impact. Palmieri also became an influential mentor. Young musicians sought him out for guidance on composition, rhythm, and improvisation. His explanations were vivid, grounded in years of experience and cultural knowledge. He spoke passionately about how Caribbean rhythmic patterns evolved and how they blended naturally with jazz traditions in the United States. His recognition as a Jazz Master Fellow by the National Endowment for the Arts in 2013 cemented his status among the greatest contributors to American music. This marked one of the highest honors any jazz musician could receive. Through all these achievements, Palmieri remained known for his warmth, humor, and unmistakable presence, often holding a cigar, always ready to share a story or a musical idea. His legacy was not only measured by awards or career milestones but by the communities he uplifted, the artists he inspired, and the rich cultural heritage he championed. In his final years, Eddie Palmieri reduced his touring schedule but continued to make select appearances. Even as he aged, his presence on stage commanded attention. His playing may have softened slightly, but the fire, the unmistakable rhythmic pulse, remained intact. Between 2018 and 2023, he performed in festivals, concerts, and special events celebrating his musical journey. Audiences cherished these moments, aware of how rare and precious they were becoming. Palmieri seemed to enjoy these final chapters, sharing stories, teaching younger musicians, and reflecting on the evolution of Latin jazz. While details about his health were not publicly disclosed, fans could see that he was entering a quieter phase of life. He appeared less frequently in public, focusing instead on family, conversations with fellow musicians, and carefully curated musical projects. Nothing dramatic or mysterious surrounded this period, simply the gentle winding down of a long, extraordinary life dedicated to music. On the Wednesday he passed away. The news arrived unexpectedly. There were no sensational details, no dramatic circumstances, only a respectful announcement from Fania Records confirming that one of the greatest innovators in Latin music had left the world at 88. The simplicity of the announcement carried immense weight. It reflected Palmieri's dignity, his professionalism, and the way he had always preferred to let his music speak for him. Almost immediately, colleagues, protégés, and admirers began posting their memories. Many described the same things: his generosity, his laughter, his discipline, his deep respect for cultural history, and the monumental sound he introduced to the world. Across New York City, tributes formed in real time. At community centers in Spanish Harlem, elders gathered to play his records, recalling stories from their youth when Palmieri's music filled dance halls and block parties. Radio hosts dedicated entire hours to his discography. Salsa DJs played La Milonga and Bilongo in his honor. Jazz musicians shared clips of his montuno techniques, describing how he had influenced their harmonic thinking. What stood out most was the unity of emotion. To many, Palmieri wasn't simply a musician who made people dance, he was someone who articulated their joy, their pride, and their resilience. His music had always served as a bridge connecting generations and cultures. In Puerto Rico, messages of gratitude poured in. His song Puerto Rico resurfaced everywhere on radio, on social media, at community gatherings. It reminded listeners of the love and respect he held for the island, even though he had lived most of his life in New York. To thousands, the song now felt like his final embrace. In academic circles, professors emphasized how Palmieri's understanding of Afro-Caribbean history enriched his compositions. Students revisited his interviews and masterclasses, rediscovering the depth behind his rhythmic choices. Even in his passing, he continued teaching. The night after his death, salsa clubs across the world held moments of silence. Moments that lasted only seconds but felt deeply symbolic. When the music resumed, Palmieri's energy returned with it because his rhythms were still alive in every piano montuno, every trombone punch, every layer of percussion that defined Latin dance music. There was no spectacle in his last moments, only peace, respect, and the echo of a lifetime devoted to his craft. And perhaps this simplicity is fitting. Eddie Palmieri exited the world exactly as he had lived in it, with quiet dignity, unwavering passion, and a legacy too powerful to fade. Eddie Palmieri's journey from a small Puerto Rican household in Spanish Harlem to global recognition as one of the greatest innovators in Latin jazz is a story of talent, determination, and cultural pride. His music captured the complexity of his community's identity, blending heritage, history, and emotion into every composition. To musicians, he leaves behind a vast catalog of groundbreaking arrangements and performances that continue to shape Latin music education. To fans, he leaves memories of concerts that stirred the soul. To communities across the Caribbean and the Americas, he leaves a cultural legacy that transcends time. His approach to the piano was fearless. His understanding of rhythm was unmatched. His commitment to storytelling through sound turned his compositions into living histories. Even without him physically here, his influence continues every time a young artist sits at a piano, every time trombones roar in a salsa arrangement, every time a dancer moves to the pulse he helped define. Eddie Palmieri's final gift to the world was not just the music he created, but the door he opened for generations to explore, innovate, and express their identity through rhythm. His journey has ended, but the cadence he crafted will continue pulsing across dance floors, stages, festivals, and hearts around the world. His rhythm lives on forever.